The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Ryedale once again. And all this week we'll be doing a run of villages which line the A64 between Scarborough and Malton. We're beginning today with a village that's actually two villages in one. That's an interesting thing which I'm sure you'll understand as we walk around. I'm stood here outside the church of one of those villages. Here it is. There's something very atmospheric about a church early in the morning, and it's about 8 o'clock right now. There's nobody around. It's quite nice actually. It's peaceful here. I'm hoping it stays that way as we make our way around this one. Welcome to the parish of Willerby. Willerby, Wilherd's farm. This week on TVI we're going to be following the shoreline of an ancient lake. Welcome back to Ryedale and to a group of villages that line the A64 between Scarborough and Malton. Today we're in Willerby, not to be confused with the suburb of Hull, which we covered some time ago. Willerby parish is a bit of an oddity. It consists of 3 villages, although only Willerby itself can be properly termed as a village, given it has the only church. There's a small hamlet called Binnington to the west, which is essentially just a farm, and then there's Staxton. Most of our walk today will focus on Staxton because it's the largest village here. It stretches between Willerby to the west and the junction of the A64 and the A1039 to the east. Willerby, in comparison, is barely more than just the ancient church. All the time here we'll have some brilliant views. To the north you can see over the flat, low-lying ground that is the Cars, a valley bottom which used to be filled with water in the last ice age. It was a huge lake which has now been drained somewhat, but it is still wet and boggy down there. Then to the south you have the Yorkshire Wolds, and high up on the hills there's an RAF base. Named RAF Staxton Wold, it has a remote radar head, similar to the one we discussed at Trimmingham in Norfolk last year. So we have a variety in this one. Let's go and see it all. This is Willerby as it looked on maps in 1900. The first thing to note here is that back in these days, Willerby, Binnington and Staxton, the village where we'll be focusing most of our main efforts today on foot, were already combined into one parish. The name Staxton comes from Old Scandinavian, and it means a village owned by a man by the name of Stacker. In the Domesday Book it's found as Stackstone. There have been several archaeological digs around the Staxton area, finding human bodies and other items. The landscape around here has changed dramatically since the last ice age. Willerby and Staxton both used to be on the shoreline of a huge lake, which filled the valley to the north of them both. The Cars, now found where the water once was, is still very wet, boggy and low-lying ground. Running through the Cars is the River Hertford, which is actually at this point a sort of canal. Its route was straightened to act as a drainage aid, and in turn the Cars have become arable fields. It's almost the sort of thing you'd expect to see on the fens. A lot of the land around here is well below 100 feet above sea level, with the old River Hertford winding its way across an often flooded plain before connecting with the Derwent at Ganton. The land was drained following the passing of the Muston Drainage Act of 1800 with the cutting of a straighter drainage channel. All the low lands were then included in the enclosures of 1803 and 04 when farms were made bigger and commoners gave up several long-held rights. So it should be no surprise that arable farming has been the main economic activity around here for several centuries. That accounts for a lot of the land use even today, but there is also a small wood and a disused quarry on top of Staxton Hill. Zooming in, let's have a closer look at the villages we're about to walk around. You can see there was a discernible gap between Willerby and Staxton in these times, but now they're almost conjoined owing to development along Wayne's Lane. There is still a small gap now though. Staxton has seen a lot of changes, the biggest being road related. You can see here it was formed of a main street with a bypass running to its south. That's not the case now because the A64 has bypassed the bypass, meaning there are now 3 roads to the east of the village centre. Mind you, mostly everything of note has been on the main street throughout its history, save for the Hare and Hounds pub, which is now closed but is still standing. The main street had a school and 2 Methodist chapels, but all 3 have now closed too. Staxton still has a school though. A new one was built in 1989, not far from the one seen here. Staxton has never had a church because it was served by the one at Willerby and still is today. That's hardly altered. Staxton is not and has never been served by its own railway station. However, these maps do show a branch of the North Trans-Pennine line passing by the village between Scarborough and York. The nearest railway station is at Seamer now, but historically it was Ganton. So on this modern map you can see how things have changed. The A64 now runs around the old main through route, which is now termed Old Moulton Road. You can also see where expansion has occurred to the west, meaning Staxton and Willerby are much closer than they've ever been before. That's good news for us though. It means we can walk both villages together as one entity, and we don't need to move the car at all. We'll begin with Willerby, which won't take us very long, seeing as it's just the church really, and then we'll head east into Staxton. Our route will go north to the playing field and then along Main Street, passing the old school and the 2 old Methodist chapels. At the eastern end of Staxton, we'll meet the site of an ancient hospital, as well as a much more modern business on the A64. Returning west, we'll walk alongside the Old Moulton Road and past the Hare and Hounds before diverting back towards Willerby via the War Memorial and the Village Hall. To finish, we'll need to head up into the hills because there's the small matter of RAF Staxton Wold. Let's get going with the Church of St Peter in Willerby. This stone-built church is ancient and reputed to be 11th century, but it's wholly possible that a place of worship existed on the site in the 7th century, making Willerby a Saxon foundation. If the Saxons were here, their early church would have been of a timber construction. This one, although far more robust in its makeup, has suffered periods of decay, none more so than in the late 16th and early 17th century when the windows were open to the weather. In those times, the northern side of the building had to be propped up to prevent collapse. In 1721, the north wall was repaired, along with several other alterations. In 1783 and 1793, the chancel was reduced in size and the aisle was narrowed. In 1881 and 82, a thorough restoration took place to give us the church we see today, but most of the former features were obliterated. It was then that the gallery at the west end of the church was removed. Now let's head into Staxton, and here we have the playing field. In terms of cricket, well, this wouldn't be a Yorkshire village without a cricket club, would it? Staxton Cricket Club was formed in 1849 and they field 2 teams in the Scarborough Beckett Cricket League. Otherwise, this playing field caters for football and provides the village with a space for recreation and leisure. It's surrounded by trees for the most part, so you don't get any good views of the cars to the north of here, but we'll see those better later anyway. Exiting the playing field, we're off to find Wayne's Lane. The first thing to note here is that Wayne's Lane has experienced a lot of growth since early times. It's now almost, but not quite, a continual built-up link between Willerby and Staxton. Okay, we are firmly in Staxton now. Now, there are two schools here. There's a new one, which you can see behind me, and then there's an old one, which we'll come to just afterwards. I can't speak this morning, it's really cold. We have two schools to talk about now. One's a current school, the other is an old one. This here is Hertford Vale Voluntary Controlled Church of England Primary School, a name that's a bit of a mouthful maybe, but it still does the job it's designed to. Situated in the centre of the village, it serves primary school and preschool children from the villages of Staxton and Willerby, but also those from Flixton, Foxholes, Ganton and Folketon. The school opened in 1989 and was built to replace the former Willerby School over the road. The school takes its name from the River Hertford, which runs through the valley to the north. The river is referred to as being backward flowing because it flows away from the sea. Originally it meandered, but now it's a very straight channel. Both the River Derwent and the River Hertford were straightened by cutting a new course for each. The Hertford was hand-dug during the Industrial Revolution. Local stories hold that the men who dug the new channel were prisoners from the Napoleonic Wars. Willerby School opened in 1878 and the building still stands on the end of Main Street. It's been turned now into a series of dwellings, at least 3 in the main building and a separate one that's taken over the attached schoolmaster's house. Let's talk a bit about nonconformism here, because outside the old school we're close to the site of the former Wesleyan Chapel. No longer in use for worship, the old chapel has been sympathetically integrated into West End Farmhouse. Houses were registered for nonconformity in 1800 and 1811. Then in 1813 the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel was built, with a similar building for the Primitives coming later in 1847. For many years both flourished, attracting good congregations even midweek. They were especially popular on winter evenings when there was no other entertainment provision in the village. Unfortunately now both chapels have closed. The former Primitive Chapel is derelict, boarded up and facing an uncertain future. Let's walk up to that and see what it looks like. Now the village has seemingly come to an end, but we need to keep walking. In a moment, we'll be able to see the site of an ancient hospital, which is now occupied by a farm and a small campsite. The hospital was marked as a spittle on old maps. Okay, we're on a very familiar road here. It's the A64. We always seem to see the A64 in Ryedale, don't we, whenever we come to it. Now, at this particular point, you can definitely tell where Lake Pickering was, because over there you can see the ground is very low lying. You've got the North York Moors in the distance over there, and in this direction you've got the Yorkshire Wolds, and the lake was in that dip. We'll see those cars a bit better later. Spittle Farm is certainly another point of interest. It originated as a hospital for lepers, then became a haven for travellers to rest before becoming a farm. Finally, following intensive restoration, it became what it is today, a collection of varied businesses with a Dickensian theme. The Spittle Farm site first came about when an ancient monastery was demolished during the dissolution by Henry VIII between 1536 and 1541. The Grade II listed 16th century farmhouse, visible as you approach the site, was the Spittle. It belonged to the Hospital of St Mary, which in turn belonged to the Priory of Bridlington. The modern visitor centre is built on what remains of the old monastery. So this is more than just a campsite. It's a site rich in history, with stories to tell about England's past. On the other side of the A64 we have more campsites, but we also have a petrol station and Harper's famous fish and chip restaurant. We might not be by the sea here, but fish and chips are still appreciated in Staxton just as much as they are on Scarborough seafront. Unsurprisingly maybe, the A64 has seen a lot of businesses along its length over the years. This chippy is just one of the many. This road has seen things like the petrol station, which is somewhat obvious, but it's also had a butcher shop and a vehicle repair garage. It's also had a pub until recently too. It might be clear today with no rain, but it ain't half windy. It's going to be windy up there in a bit. We've got to climb that hill after we've done the walk. Now closed, this is the former Hare and Hounds pub. It was built to serve passing horse-drawn coaches originally as they made their way from York to Scarborough. It still received a lot of trade from passing motorists on the A64 until its untimely demise. The building itself is a 16th century coaching house with many original features still in place, such as its open fires and beamwork that runs throughout. Upon the approach to Staxton, the building is a very imposing piece of architecture thanks to its prominent whitewashed facade. Now, the Hare and Hounds forms part of a motorcycle business called GMEC, and speaking of motorcycles, Stakston is locally famous for them, thanks to the Yorkshire Wolds. Hill climbing was a very popular spectator sport here back in the day. Hill climb events held at Stakston were organised under the Scarborough and District Motorcycle Club, the earliest official one being around 1907. They ran until 1930, when the accident rate called for more stringent controls. Stakston Hill once had a sharp 90-degree corner in it, but despite that it was still used for hill climb racing. The hill climb was 3/4 of a mile from start to finish. Remember, early machines were largely belt-driven and had limited power, so it was a real feat to reach the top. Next, we pass the War Memorial. This can be found dead opposite the old school on the junction of Main Street and Ings Lane. This was erected in 1920 and honours those who lost their lives in both World War I and World War II. This used to be at the eastern end of the village, but was later moved to this more central location on what's become now a pretty little village green. Finally, we have the village hall. This opened in 1938 and is frequently used for village events and other private functions. Now, speaking of community events, Stakston is famous for far more than just the hill climb racing we've already mentioned. The village is also known for Stakstonbury Family Music Festival. Commonly abbreviated to Stakstonbury, its name is a parody of Glastonbury. It's held every year at Stakston and is best known for its breakthrough local music acts. The festival has run since 2009 and has been very successful, not just with local people, but a wider audience too. The size and nature of the festival, held over 3 or 4 days in the open air, is now attended by around 10,000 people annually. While Stakston and Willerby stand on the shoreline of the ancient lake which lay to the north, to the south it's a different ballgame. The land rises steeply as the Yorkshire Wolds make their presence felt here. The elevation of these hills has played an essential military role over the years. As the land rises, the view into the valley below where the lake used to be gets better and better and better. Handily then, there's a place where you can pull over and admire that view. It's called the Ken War Viewpoint. I stopped to have a look. Yes, I'm pleased it's a clear day today, because up here you get a fantastic view of where Lake Pickering used to be. Now there's a few trees and things in the way here, but I'm still pretty confident of finding a decent vantage point to show you exactly what I can see from this little bit of hard standing. We'll get a bit closer to those hedgerows and then you should be able to see exactly what I can. You can now see the cars in all their glory. You're looking at the remains of the ancient lake that filled the valley between here and the A170 running into Scarborough. So far, we haven't named this once vast lake, but it did have a title. It was called Lake Pickering. The idea that this lake existed was first mooted in 1902 when Professor Percy Kendall of Leeds University published a paper detailing his theories. It has been suggested that Lake Pickering was the largest inland lake in Britain at the end of the last ice age. We know for sure it filled the Vale of Pickering between the North York Moors and the Yorkshire Wolds, and when it eventually drained away, the channel it left behind became the River Derwent. In modern times, the route of the Derwent down there is now an artificial flood relief channel. As well as the Derwent, it left behind a complex of smaller rivers and marshes. The Cars, marshes, ings and wet meadows have now all been drained by humans, and the landscape is crossed by a network of canalised drainage ditches regulating the water table. Much of the flow of the Derwent has been diverted into a new channel called the Sea Cut along a previously dry side valley, which was probably a glacial overflow channel. It runs into the Scalby Beck, which then empties into the North Sea. North of Lake Pickering, the North Sea ice sheet was restrained by the North York Moors, while the Cleveland Hills deflected ice to the west down the Ouse Valley. The extent of the Ouse Valley ice varied, but there are two major terminal moraines today, one at Escrick and the other at York. We may never accurately know the extent of the lake. It was huge, there can be no question, but it was joined to other smaller pro-glacial lakes. In 2003, John Eckersley published a book entitled Exploring Lake Pickering, which takes the form of a 155-mile walk around its supposed edge. Yeah, well, even though my camera is not the best with long-distance stuff, you can still pick out some pools of water down there. It's still very marshy, very boggy area of land. It's even though it's been drained, there are still areas of water down there, but yeah, for the most part it's arable farmland, and you can definitely tell, can't you, the dip. You can see the dip between the North York Moors and where we are on the Yorkshire Wolds. That is where Lake Pickering was. This is RAF Staxton Wold, which is alternatively known as RRH Staxton Wold because it's a remote radar head. It sits on top of Staxton Wold at a height of 590 feet above sea level and is an air defence radar station, which has been in continuous use since 1939. As such, it has a claim to be the oldest working radar station in the world. Going back further, the site has had an early warning function since the 3rd century AD, when the Romans used it as a warning beacon. The base on it now has undergone many upgrades of different radar systems in its time. Staxton Wold was first selected as the site of a radar station in 1937 when it was set up as part of the Chain Home system, but building work didn't begin until late 1938. Fully operational by April 1939, this is the only one of the original wartime stations still in use. Just before the outbreak of World War II, it was equipped with a Bofors anti-aircraft gun, and by that December, it was one of only 2 operational radar stations in Yorkshire. For 6 weeks during 1939, Sir Bernard Lovell was posted to Staxton Wold from the University of Manchester whilst assessing radar at the site. Operations at the base were wound down in 1945 when the war came to an end, but it was partially reactivated in 1951 for training. During the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s, staff at Staxton Wold were billeted at RAF Leconfield, Alamein Barracks, which is the former RAF Driffield, RAF Bempton, and civilian housing requisitioned in Scarborough. Lastly, here's a small drive through the hamlet of Binnington, which lies to the west of Willerby, further along the A64. This is not much more than just a farm, really, so we won't dwell on it too much. So, from one village on the former shore of the ancient lake to another, as we move along down the A64 to the next. The village we're off to now is far smaller than Staxton, and it's all neatly positioned in a sort of squashed rectangle, north of a grand old hall. Hello folks, welcome back to Ryedale for another episode. Now behind me there you can see we have a semi-familiar railway line. We have mentioned this before, we have seen it before actually in places like Barton Le Willows. That's the line that runs between York and Scarborough. And there used to be a station here where I'm standing. It was a halt rather than an actual station. But it did have a lot of passengers. And the reason for that is because this place has got a very well-known golf club. It's not unheard of to see people walking around this place with golf clubs in their hands. This is Ganton. Ganton, Galmer's Farm. Today on TVI we come to Ganton, a small village located between Moulton and Scarborough on the A64, just a few miles away from the larger villages of Staxton to the east and Sherburn to the west. Again, this is a village that lined the shore of the ancient Lake Pickering. Ganton is a place that's associated with sports. In particular, there are two which rule the roost here. They are cricket and golf. But it's the latter of those which is the pharaoh amongst kings in these parts. Ganton Golf Club has a history linked to the very top of the game. Built on a piece of sandy ground left behind by the meltwaters from the last ice age, the very same which formed Lake Pickering by the way, Ganton Golf Club hosted Ryder Cup matches in the 1940s and has seen several other professional golf tournaments since. The village itself wouldn't be without the course today, but there was a time when it was just Ganton, minding its own business next to the coaching route from York to Scarborough. As such, it has an old coaching inn called the Greyhound, which has become popular for golfers now. Elsewhere, Ganton has a village hall, a church, an old school and an old railway station. Complementing it all to the south is the huge Ganton Hall, lived in by a man who spent 30 years as a banker before taking over one of the UK's biggest house building firms. Let's go and see it all. This is what Ganton looked like in 1900. Situated on the southern edge of the former Lake Pickering and immediately north of the Yorkshire Wolds, Ganton lies 7 miles west of Filey and 9 miles southwest of Scarborough. It was historically part of the East Riding of Yorkshire until 1974, but it's now firmly a North Yorkshire village. It's situated on the Centenary Way and the Yorkshire Wolds Way National Trail. Before boundary changes in 1832, Ganton included the sub-parish of Potter Brompton and Gantondale Inn, a former posting house on the B1249. Potter Brompton is now part of the parish again, and the former inn has been renamed Gantondale House. Note from this map how much of the village was taken up by parkland. That's because Ganton Hall commanded some massive grounds, stretching from the site of the actual house all the way up to what is now the A64. Ganton Hall is definitely the key property here. Before the Norman conquest, Ganton's ploughlands, its meadows and its church were all held by Morcar, all of which were in King William's hands by 1086. A small estate was held by Robert de Bruce soon after, and a main lordship was held by the Percy family until at least the late 14th century. The Acklams were tenants of the estate from the mid-13th to the beginning of the 15th century, and thereafter it passed through various hands until it was acquired by John Ledyard in 1586. It descended with the Ledyards, who became Ganton's prominent family. The estate was centred on Ganton Hall, which has since been rebuilt. The Ledyards continued to own it all until the early 20th century, when it was sold to Harold Wrigley, and it remains to this day in the ownership of the Wrigley family. Aside from the hall, which would have still been within the Ledyards' ownership at the time of these maps, Ganton had a mere smattering of other landmarks. On this map you can see there was a church, dedicated to St Nicholas. That's the only religious building here today. There was a chapel which you can see here, but that's long since closed. To the west you can see Ganton's sporting connections. The cricket ground is here, built on part of the hall's parkland, whilst the golf course dominated the area immediately to the north. It still does. A school is also shown, but that's now closed and children have to go elsewhere. Surprisingly not shown here is the Greyhound. That was Ganton's one and only pub, which has since been turned into a B&B. It was definitely operating at this time though. Ganton looks almost the same today. Barring a few infills here and there, the general layout and feel of the place is much the same as it was back in 1900. It still has that sort of squashed rectangular shape, albeit just off the slightly realigned route of the modern A64. The route for this one will be simple. We'll start at an old railway station to the north before beginning the walk at the old school. Then we'll hop over the A64 and follow Woodside Road, passing the village hall and the cricket ground. Sweeping our way past the nursery plantation, we'll then go to the church before working back up Main Street to the A64 to meet the Greyhound. The golf club will finish off the walk, but we'll still have two more things to cover at that point. One is Ganton Hall, which we'll drive to, and then there's the small matter of Potter Brompton, the hamlet to the west, which is just south of the A64 and still part of the boundaries here. This should be a good one, all things considered. Let's go. Before we can go walking today, we have to cover the railway station that used to serve this village. Here we can see the railway line that passes the village crossing the cars towards Scarborough. This was served by Ganton Halt, a small station within easy walking distance of the A64. Ganton Halt was only a minor railway station, but as we'll discover later, it did see quite a lot of passengers. In a way, it's a little surprising it's not still open. Serving the York to Scarborough line, it was opened in 1845 by the York and North Midland Railway. In order to speed up traffic on the line, most of the intermediate stations, including Ganton, were closed to passenger traffic in 1930. It remained open to goods traffic until 1964, when it was closed fully. Keep all of this in mind for later. On foot now, our first stop in Ganton is the old school on the road that runs north from the A64 to Ganton Halt. Now, it's important to note that this is not and has never been Ganton School. That's a special school based in Hull, and it was built in 1978. This is far older. So this was Ganton Village School. Dates are sketchy here, but from what I can gather, this opened in the later 19th century and lasted until at least 1941. Now, rather bizarrely, you can buy a book about this school from Amazon. It's called The Ganton School Manager's Minute Book. That recorded all of the minutes from its committee from its first meeting in April 1903 until 1941. It also includes copies of key letters sent and received by the school managers. It details how they dealt with daily issues such as hiring staff and deciding on their pay. Between 1903 and 1912, there was a huge issue of overcrowding at this school, and there were pressures on the committee to enlarge it. You see, the school was a central part of Ganton village life. Lots of the rooms were used for village clubs and events, as well as education. The transcript of the manager's minute book is a treasure trove of information for anyone connected with Ganton, but it's also of interest to anyone wanting to get a feel for what it might have been like trying to manage a school at the beginning of the last century. Okay, so school covered. Now it's time to hop over the A64, and this means walking into the sun at this particular point because the sun is just starting to rise above the Yorkshire Wolds now. So this is the view I've got. It's very gleamy, isn't it? Well, over there somewhere there's a cricket club and also Ganton's Village Hall. So we'll get over the A64 and we'll check them out. After crossing the A64, the next thing to see is a sports area. More specifically, it's a cricket pitch actually. Ganton Cricket Club field two teams in the Scarborough Beckett League, and they both play here at this ground overlooking the A64. Next to the cricket field, we have the Village Hall, a modern facility available for hire with ample car parking, a kitchen, a spacious hall with seating, and a storeroom. It's a great venue for parties, functions, meetings, training, presentations, dancing, music, and so on. The hall is located on Woodside Road, and in a moment you'll see why this lane gets its name. To get around Ganton, you have to pass through some wooded areas, the largest of which is a clump of trees that sit alongside this very road. It's called the Nursery Plantation. Okay, time to go to the church. You just saw the war memorial there on the entrance to the church. It looks like getting to this one, you've got to go up a set of steps. It's definitely on a hillside, this. There's the war memorial there. You can see the church over there, and there appears to be a set of steps leading up to it. Let's see. Round the corner onto Main Street now, the church is next. It sits slightly away from the road, mostly hidden by some thick, dense trees by the roadside. Dedicated to St. Nicholas, this one dates back to the 13th century. The oldest parts of the church are the chancel and the transept arch, which have that 13th century date, but mostly the rest of the church was rebuilt in the 14th. The nave and south transept survive from this period. In the 15th century, the tower and the porch were added. The whole building was restored in 1843, with that work including a partial rebuild of the chancel. The church was given a Grade 2 listing in 1966, and then in 2012 it was placed on the Heritage at Risk register, as it was in urgent need of repair. It has since been removed from that. Materials-wise, it's built of sandstone, and the main roof is a stone slate. The roof of the porch is a stone slab. Architecturally, it's all in the Perpendicular style. There are two stained glass windows, one by Capronier and another by Wales. Inside is a Baroque monument to Sir John Ledyard. That adorns the east wall, and there are several wall tablets to other members of the Ledyard family. Right, let's go up Main Street now, which is otherwise residential, and I'll see you again shortly on the main road to Scarborough. Now we've got a blue plaque on this house here, and it's a name which we'll be mentioning in a moment when we cover the golf club. Harry Varden, 1870 to 1937, champion golfer, lived here from 1895 to 1902. Keep his name in mind, he'll become more important in a moment. Next for us though, we're walking to the end of Main Street and taking a left turn. We're heading for the Ganton Greyhound. Out onto the A64 now, the next thing to pass is the Ganton Greyhound. It's a B&B these days, but as you can probably tell, it used to be a pub. Originally a bustling 17th century coaching inn, the Ganton Greyhound Inn has now been thoughtfully extended and refurbished. It has 17 well-appointed letting bedrooms, each offering a unique characterful ambience. The main building comprises a spacious ground floor featuring a welcoming snug, a delightful restaurant perfect for indulging guests. Upstairs you'll find the private accommodation. Although it's named after the greyhound breed of dog, Ganton has no affiliation with greyhound racing. If we're talking sports, Ganton is associated a lot more with golf, and so many of the patrons here can often be seen wielding golf clubs. And so just before we bring this walk to a close, we have to make a mention of the golf course. Aside from the big building which lies to the south of the village, which we'll cover separately in a moment, Ganton Golf Club is arguably the best known feature of this one. Ganton Golf Club is no ordinary course. This one has hosted Ryder Cup matches in its time. It did so in 1949. It's also hosted the Amateur Championship 3 times in 1964, 1977 and 1991, as well as the Walker Cup in 2003. Put simply, many pros know this one. Golf was first played at Ganton in the summer of 1891 on a course laid out by Tom Chisholm of St Andrews, although he did have some assistance from Robert Bird, the club's first professional and head greenkeeper. The site chosen formed part of Sir Charles Ledyard's Ganton estate and was very rough ground, covered with whins and many varieties of grasses and wild flowers. Thousands of years previously, this area had been submerged as part of an inlet from the North Sea. However, that was the main reason why it was chosen. The natural sandy subsoil was an ideal place to develop a golf course, and being only 11 miles from Scarborough meant it wasn't too hard for players to reach it, either by road or by rail. The latter method was more favourable. Ganton Holt Station, after all, is literally a quarter of a mile away from the clubhouse here. The railway line's presence meant that Ganton's membership included a lot of people who resided in the old West Riding of Yorkshire. In 1896, Harry Vardon came as a professional, and it was during his stay that he won the first 3 of his 6 Open Championships. It was to Ganton that he brought back the US Championship trophy in 1900. Vardon, along with Ted Ray, James Braid and J.H. Taylor, contributed to a major redesign of the course in 1905. Many other architects, including Harry Colt, Dr. Alistair Mackenzie, Tom Simpson and C.K. Cotton, have added improvements since. It was Vardon's matches against J.H. Taylor in 1896 and Willie Park Jr. in 1899 that first brought Ganton to the notice of the golfing world. There is no doubt that the Ryder Cup was a major factor in confirming Ganton's international reputation as an outstanding championship course. Right, so in effect, that is Ganton Village, but we still need to see the one thing that ties this all together, and that would be Ganton Hall. Let's get in the car and go and have a look. So what about that big building to the south of it all then? Well, this is Ganton Hall, and it's currently the residence of a man who knows a thing or two about building houses. Ganton Hall is lived in by Nicholas Wrigley and his family. He's the former chairman of Persimmon Homes. The history of Ganton Hall goes all the way back to 1586, when it was described in records as a new build made of a chalky stone and covered with a slate roof. The current house is far newer than that. It was rebuilt slightly further south between 1866 and 1868. There was a crossover period where both houses stood, but the older original house was demolished in 1870. 40 years later, in 1910, the house was sold to the Wrigley family, and they've remained here ever since. In the late 20th and early 21st century, it was the home of Phillida Wrigley and her husband, and more recently the owner has been Nicholas. No longer the chairman of Persimmon, he was forced to resign from that role in 2017 after awarding a £128 million bonus to the company's CEO. Before being involved with the housing company, Wrigley was a non-executive director at the merchant bank N.M. Rothschild & Sons until 2008. He had a 30-year career with the bank, rising to managing director of investment banking. Lastly, we're off to check out the tiny hamlet of Potter Brompton, which lies between Ganton and the next village along the shoreline of the former Lake Pickering. This is very much like Binnington was yesterday, except this one does have a few more houses. Is Potter Brompton known for anything? Well, no, not really, but it does have a small bakery and tea rooms where the main road through it joins the A64. It's based at Glebe Farm and it's run by Sally Middlewood, a farmer's daughter turned baker. For 30 years, Sally has been baking traditional farmhouse bread, cakes, pastries, tray bakes and desserts here, and her business has become a popular stopping point for people heading to the Yorkshire coast, year after year after year. It's open 7 days a week too. The 350-acre farm is run separately from the bakery by other members of Sally's family. It grows cereals and fodder beet as well as rearing sheep. The farm also has over 200 free-range hens. All the eggs produced are either sold to the shop customers or used in the bakery. And with that visited, it's time we got ourselves to the next one. Tomorrow we're going to what is the largest village in this current Ryedale run. In effect, it's almost like a small town, but it still has the sort of Yorkshire village feel that we've become so used to out here. I'll see you tomorrow. Welcome back to Ryedale again, everybody. Time for a big village. We've seen a couple of small ones yesterday and Monday. Well, this one has got a bit more meat to it. Now, this one used to deal with steel, believe it or not. We're a long way away from traditional steel working towns, but out here in the countryside, the commodity was very much useful for people. And steel is still traded in this area today. We'll see where as we journey around Sherburn. Sherburn, bright or clear stream. Today on TVI we're in Sherburn, and it's the second time we've met a village with that name. A long time ago we covered the much larger Sherburn in Elmet near Selby, which had a lot to do with aircraft. This flavour, although also in North Yorkshire, is more about steel. Yes, even though we are deep in the Yorkshire countryside, Sherburn in Ryedale has a construction-based past. Dominating the centre of the village there are two huge factories which sit on the site of the former Ward Brothers Steelworks, founded after World War II. Steel has been shipped to and from Sherburn for years since, and it kept the local railway station busy long after it had closed doors to passengers. Sherburn has always been an industrious little place anyway. It once had a brewery, for example. Central to the history of Sherburn is the Saxon saint Hilda, who founded Whitby Abbey. The main road that passes through the village is called St Hilda's Street, and the local church is dedicated to her as well. That church, by the way, is on the Sykes Churches Trail. Although it has a population that's pushing 4 figures now, Sherburn still feels like a typical Yorkshire village. It's on the Yorkshire Wolds Way National Trail and the Centenary Way long-distance footpath, so it gets a lot of visitors. Let's see what puts this one on the map, shall we? Sherburn has always been one of the larger villages in Ryedale, and there's evidence to suggest that it had some importance from early times. This is what it looked like in 1900, but in Saxon times it could well have been bigger. In 2011, excavations to the east of the present village uncovered the remains of a large Anglo-Saxon settlement. Even if it wasn't as major as that may suggest, Sherburn has always been one of the principal villages in this area since the time of Doomsday. Sherburn was part of the East Riding of Yorkshire until 1974 when it transferred to North Yorkshire. Sherburn gave its name to a rural district in the East Riding from 1894 to 1935, when that district was abolished and the village was transferred to the rural district of Norton. Local residents will still tell you this is the East Riding of Yorkshire, and they do have a point if you consider the old boundaries. Reflecting this connection, Sherburn contains a pub called the East Riding Hotel, and there was a brewery too, which also sported that name. Let's see what Sherburn had to its name in these late Victorian times. It was, to all intents and purposes, 2 roads. One was St Hilda Street, which ran from the Cars to the north down to what we now know as the A64. The other was the A64, the main road to Scarborough. St Hilda's Street featured the main bits, including the church dedicated to the same saint, a long way north of the main cluster. Further down the road was a school which still exists today. The rest was housing mainly, but some of those on the right have now disappeared. This map shows the 2 Methodist chapels, one either side of the A64. Only one of those still stands now. Note there were 2 watercourses that ran either side of the main street. One was called the East Beck, the other was the West Beck. Both of those still exist. The East Beck had a corn mill on it, whilst the West Beck was handily placed for the East Riding Brewery. Speaking of alcohol-related establishments, neither of Sherburn's 2 pubs are shown here, which is a bit odd, but they were both trading at this time. So this is what Sherburn looks like now. There are new builds to the north today, but the main core of the village around the A64 has remained mostly in situ. The largest alteration has come in the form of the industrial estate, which has obliterated some of those old houses. This won't be a difficult route to walk, but it will be fairly long. Sherburn has a lot to cover in a relatively densely packed centre. We'll get things going at the church on St Hilda Street and work our way south to the crossroads where it meets the A64. Turning right there, we'll head along the A64, passing the old brewery and the fire station before heading up to the site of the old windmill. Handily, there's a footpath you can join there which runs up to the playing field. The last section will then see us form a loop around the newer northern sections before returning to the church. Then it's a drive to the old railway station located in the Cars to the north of it all. We have a lot to take in here, so we'd better get moving. Let's get things started with the Church of St Hilda at the northern end of the village. Now, St Hilda features prominently in Sherburn. As well as the dedication to her at this church, the main road through Sherburn from north to south is called St Hilda's Street. St Hilda was a Saxon saint, best known for being the founder of Whitby Abbey. An important figure in the Christianisation of Anglo-Saxon England, St Hilda was abbess in several convents and recognised for the wisdom that drew kings to her for advice. We'll fill in some more on St Hilda when we get to Whitby, but this church is our main focus here. A Grade 2 listed building, this forms part of the Sykes Churches Trail, which we're all familiar with by now thanks to the many we covered in the East Riding series. This one was restored by Hodgson Fowler for Sir Tatton Sykes between 1909 and 1912, a process which included the addition of the current tower. In 2019, thieves stripped lead from the northern side of the church roof. Not a piece of history it wants on its record really, but there you go. Not far from the church we have a cross. This isn't a war memorial, even though it looks like it might be. Grade 2 listed and designed by Temple Moore, this cross was given to the village by Sir Tatton Sykes as a thank you for the restoration of St Hilda's Church. A bit further down the road we've got Sherburn's Doctor's Surgery. More accurately, this is the Sherburn and Rillington practice. Rillington is a village we've yet to see. It's further west towards Malton and has its own branch surgery called the Poplars. So the centre of Sherburn is a 20-mile-per-hour zone because there's a school. We'll come to that school shortly. Before we get to that, we have the small matter of the village hall. It's on the next corner. To the corner of West Garth now, where we find the village hall. This has recently acquired its own Facebook page, helping to cement its status as the go-to place in the area for communal goings-on. There are 2 venues that can do that in Sherburn though. We'll see the other later. Next we have the school. Sherburn is served by a Church of England voluntary controlled primary, which is run as a federation with another school. We've already seen that other school. It's the one we saw in the Luttons episode a while ago now. Once again, like Ganton, not a great deal is known about this old school, but Amazon again is your friend if you want to find out more. On there is a book called The History of Sherburn in Hertford Lythe Primary School, written by Anne Collier. On the left next, we have a huge industrial area. This has been here since at least the end of World War II, when local brothers Wilf and Frank Ward established a steelworks business. Named Ward Brothers, the firm was a large employer across Ryedale at one time, and in Scarborough too. The Ward's site now contains 2 factories. One belongs to a company called Severfield and the other is owned by Kingspan. The Kingspan factory is very interesting actually. It has a 5 megawatt solar array, which is one of the largest commercial rooftop solar projects ever built in the UK. Both companies here now deal with construction materials. Severfield is a York-based structural steel contractor. By turnover, it's the largest company of its type in the UK, with a capacity of 130,000 tonnes per year. Severfield had a hand in building several major UK landmarks like London's 2012 Olympic Stadium, the retractable roof on Wimbledon's Centre Court, Arsenal's Emirates Stadium, and even the iconic London Bridge Tower, more commonly known these days as the Shard. Kingspan, or more accurately the Kingspan Group, is headquartered in Ireland, but it trades in over 80 countries with more than 273 sites employing 25,401 people as of late 2024. It was founded in the 1960s by Eugene Murtagh. In 2022, Kingspan announced a plan to build a new €280 million manufacturing plant in Ukraine to manufacture insulation and building materials for the company's Eastern European markets. 3 years later, a North American manufacturing plant in Kentucky was announced too. So Sherburn has always had this connection to steelworks and these amazing building projects. Not bad for a village that's so far away from the massive urban centres that have acquired them. Steel helped to keep Sherburn's railway station in business until the 1980s. Now, Kingspan and Severfield are by no means the only businesses you can find in Sherburn today. If you just go up the road a little bit further, you come to a handful more. Shops-wise now, Sherburn has been well served for quite a long time. As we know, many shops in rural villages have gone nowadays thanks to the rise of the motor car. However, Sherburn has a convenience store on St Hilda Street, which has been serving folks here for over a century. Named Central Stores, this well-established business has been at the heart of Sherburn life since 1905, providing the locals with newspapers, magazines, convenience and essential goods. The property also includes a refurbished owner's flat and a large, well-maintained private garden. In 2021, it was bought by a couple from London who, like so many southerners over the last few decades, have been migrating north, moving to the region in search of a good business and a better standard of living. Well, why not? Yorkshire's great than us. Given the size of Sherburn, it's a little surprising maybe that it only has the one pub. This is that pub. It's called the East Riding Hotel. Its name is a direct reference to the fact that Sherburn used to be within the East Riding of Yorkshire. Some locals still maintain it is. The East Riding Hotel used to be called the New Inn. This once belonged to Punch Taverns and is divided into a main drinking room and a games area. This establishment is popular with walkers, particularly during the summer months because it's so close to the Yorkshire Wolds Way. Over the road from the pub we have the first of the Methodist chapels in Sherburn. The other one has been demolished now, and I'll show you where that was shortly. This one is far from being torn down. In fact, Sherburn Methodist Church is still very much in use. It's had a few modernisations since it was first built in the early 19th century. You can see the entrance has certainly changed a little. There's also a newer extension to the rear. This church is used as a social hub and often hosts things like coffee mornings. The little hut-like shop that sits next to the chapel has been the local chippy for decades. It seems to be closed now though. It's had a couple of incarnations over recent years. Most locals will remember this under the names The Seafarer and then RJ's Fish and Chips. Okay, so we've reached the end of St Hilda Street now, which is traffic lighted. It's a junction with the A64. We're going to go over this briefly to find the site of the other chapel I was talking about a few moments ago, and then we're taking what's my left at the moment, but it will be right eventually, past this bakery on the corner you can see here, and we'll go up towards a brewery, an old brewery. And so here we have the site of the other chapel. Built for the primitive Methodists in 1835, this low wall is all that remains of where it stood. Although long gone, I've linked a website below that shows a photo of it during a flood in 1910. To the corner now, where we find this broad white building that's currently housing a business called Lily's Sandwiches. It's a bakery, but this also doubles as an off-licence, and for a long time it was also Sherburn's post office. In fact, it still retains a post box in the wall, facing the A64. It serves freshly made sandwiches, pies, pasties and cakes 6 days a week. Breakfasts are also on offer and you can sit in or take away. Some reviewers reckon this is quite expensive, but its presence on the A64 with passing traffic heading to the coast helps it to stay in business. Now, as we know, there's only one pub in Sherburn these days and we've already seen it. However, there used to be another. It was called the Pigeon Pie and it was located just to the west of the crossroads where the A64 meets St Hilda's Street. Now a block of residences called Old Pigeon Pie Court, this former pub has stood on the A64 since the early 1800s and only stopped trading in the mid-1990s. It was then used as a computer shop until it was converted into the three houses you see here in the 2000s. Behind the pub, and still within its listed curtilage, there was a barn and stable complex, which is now another house called Pigeon Pie Barn. For a while it had been used as a cafe, but then fell into disrepair before developers built 9 new houses adjacent to it. Incidentally, there are some photos that do the rounds of the Pigeon Pie bearing the name Blue Chip. That's what it was called when it was the computer shop. As a pub, it was linked to the next landmark just up the road. The East Riding Hotel wasn't the only building around here that bore the name of the county this village used to belong to. If you walk out of Sherburn westwards, you can't miss this building. This was the East Riding Brewery, and it was associated with the name Kirk. This 3-storey brewery building is in immaculate condition and is listed Grade 2. Its history goes back to 1840 when Matthew Rivis, a man from Wycombe on the other side of the Cars, converted these buildings alongside the West Beck into the East Riding Brewery. In 1857, Rivis sold the brewery to James Kirk of Leeds, and soon afterwards Sherburn ales became famous throughout Yorkshire and beyond. The success of the brewery was incredibly quick, but it didn't last for long. The brewery closed in 1923 and stood empty for several years. Afterwards, it was subsequently bought and used by the Cundall family, who were farmers. They used it to store corn and breed pigs at first, but later it diversified again. Latterly, it was occupied by Sherburn Forge, a group of architectural metalworkers, but before that, during the 1970s and 1980s, it was the head office of Wells Cundall's estate agents and auctioneers. Now, the Cundall name is very important around here, thanks mainly to one man. Here's a piece on Sherburn's most famous son, James Cundall, MBE. He's a theatrical producer notable for his association with many commercially successful musicals and shows which have been seen by millions of people all around the world. He's the man behind Lunchbox Theatrical Productions and the Imperial Ice Stars, and it was he who conceived York's annual Christmas ice rink, the Ice Factor. He also created York Shakespeare's Rose Theatre. He's very deserving of that MBE by the sounds of it, right? Cundall was born into the farming family at the foot of the Yorkshire Wolds here in Sherburn. He originally qualified as a chartered surveyor and worked for the family firm of estate agents and auctioneers. As such, in 1985, he opened Cundall's Estate Agents, and his office was based in York. He later moved to London to pursue a career in finance before in 1992 his work took him to Hong Kong. There, he and a group of like-minded businessmen decided there was a market for bringing West End musicals to local audiences. Over the next 6 years, the group brought many international productions to the city, such as Les Miserables and the acclaimed Allegria from Cirque du Soleil. 1998 saw him leave the world of finance, as this venture had become far, far more. In 1999, he moved to Sydney to take up the role of Director of Arts and Entertainment for Australasia with IMG, where he was responsible for over 30 productions in the region during his 4-year tenure. By 2003, he joined International Concert Attractions as its managing director. That same year, Cundall co-established the Imperial Ice Stars, an international troupe of former Olympic, World, European and National Championship skaters. The troupe successfully toured the world with their productions of Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake and Cinderella, and also The Nutcracker. As for the Ice Factor, that began as an annual open-air ice rink in York, first conceived by Cundall in 2005. It was built as a temporary structure at the Eye of York for the Christmas season and returned to the same place until 2010, when it was forced to relocate to the York Designer Outlet. After relocating, the Ice Factor became the centrepiece to a new concept entitled Yorkshire's Winter Wonderland, intended to draw the crowds to the out-of-town shopping centre for more than just ice skating. The event now includes a traditional fun fair and a Christmas market. In all, his company put on countless productions across the world, all under the Lunchbox name. All was going well until 2019, when, following poor attendances, the company was placed in administration, owing over £5 million to creditors. As you head further west out of Sherburn along the Scarborough Road, the next thing to pass is the fire station. This is one of the 38 fire stations that are dotted across North Yorkshire. Normally, this covers Sherburn and the surrounding villages only. However, crews here were involved in the terrible fires that devastated parts of the moors north of Scarborough last year. In fact, all 38 of the county's firefighting teams took part in that unprecedented disaster. Top job, guys. After the fire station, there's a track on the right called Millfield. This leads to a clump of houses that are somewhat set away from the rest of Sherburn, and they all stand close to where Sherburn's windmill used to be. It's no longer there. You may have spotted it on the maps at the start, but even if you did, you'd have seen it was already disused. Virtually nothing is known of this mill other than where it stood. Trying to research it was tough, given there was a mill at Sherburn in Elmet as well. Loads is known about that one. I was a little bit worried about this part of the walk actually, because I knew with it raining yesterday this could be muddy because it's definitely not paved. But to be honest with you, this has actually turned out to be the nicest part of the walk. It's not muddy at all, it's quite pleasant, and the scenery around here is absolutely gorgeous. Those are the Wolds over there, and I can see the North York Moors over there. Also in the foreground I can see the Sherburn Community Sports Club, and that's next. After traversing a footpath that runs between the mill site and the village, we've arrived at Sherburn Community and Sports Club. This facility opened in 2013 and it's managed by a team of trustees. The club room can accommodate in excess of 100 people. This is more than just a sports club. It's been used for many different events, including weddings, wakes, dances, quizzes and conferences. For a short time, its flexibility even allowed it to be used as the doctor's surgery for 6 weeks, whilst the one we saw earlier was being refurbished. The building has large picture windows which offer views towards the Yorkshire Wolds and across the sports field to the Vale of Pickering. Outside is a large seated patio which overlooks a nice children's play area. The sports field, which is adjacent, has a cricket pitch, 1 full-sized football pitch and 4 junior football pitches, all of which are used to full capacity by senior males and a mixture of boys and girls teams. We're in a Yorkshire village, so you better believe that this has a cricket team in the summertime. Indeed it does. In fact, it has 2. This field plays host to Sherburn Cricket Club, who field 2 teams in the Scarborough Beckett League. Just before we bring this walk to a close, we have this little street to talk about. It's called Vicarage Farm Close, and to the untrained eye, it's not terribly interesting. But would I be talking about this if it was just another street? Yeah, you know the answer to that one by now, don't you? During World War II, Sherburn had a small prisoner of war camp, and it was located here. The buildings survived in a variety of agricultural uses until the early 21st century, when they were replaced by Vicarage Farm Close. Seemingly now, there's no trace of this wartime past left. Okay, almost round. Please don't fail me mapping software. There should be a gap here that leads to the church, and there is, down the side of these garages. So yeah, that is effectively Sherburn village. But there is just the one thing we have left to cover. If we go in that direction where that car has just come from, that takes you towards the old railway station. And this station began life as Sherburn, but when it closed, it had a different name. So the last thing to see is the station that used to serve Sherburn on the York to Scarborough railway line. This wasn't simply Sherburn Station. In all, it had at least 3 different names in its time. When it closed to passengers in 1930, it was called Weaverthorpe. Opened in 1845, the station was originally named Sherburn, but was renamed to Wycombe in 1874 to avoid confusion with 3 other stations called Sherburn across the country, the most notable one being Sherburn in Elmet. Then, in 1882, it was forced to change again after the opening of a station in Wycombe itself on the Forge Valley line that we covered last week, and thus the station became Weaverthorpe, despite the fact that Weaverthorpe village is a heck of a long way from where we are here. Passengers wishing to go to Weaverthorpe would have been very disappointed, as that village was located 5 miles away over the Wolds escarpment. Weaverthorpe station was to the immediate east of the level crossing, which still exists today, with the goods crane located on the western side. The station retained its small goods yard until 1981 because it handled steel traffic, and by now we all know where it was bound for. The station house is now in private ownership, but the signal box was still in use until last year. It was the only one still in operation between Malton and Seamer. And we are through Sherburn. It's a fascinating village, isn't it? And completely uncharacteristic of what we've come to expect from Ryedale, even though it does retain that lovely Yorkshire village-like feel. Let's see what the next one has in store for us. We continue west tomorrow. Hello folks, welcome back to Ryedale once again. Now in this episode you're going to get 2 for the price of 1. I've got 2 villages to cover in this one. One's an east and the other is a west. This is the parish of Heslerton. Heslerton, Hazel Place Farm. Today on TVI we come to the parish of Heslerton. This one consists of two villages, East Heslerton and West Heslerton, and they're separated by about a mile's worth of the A64 between Scarborough and Moulton. Despite sharing the same name, these two villages are very different. Situated once again on the southern shore of the former Lake Pickering with the Wolds to the south and the Carrs to the north, the Heslerton villages are like chalk and cheese. The locals love them, and there are plenty of reasons to actually. For a century and a half, one family had ownership of the entire village of West Heslerton, and it's a name we know already. Once again, the Dorneys make an appearance on TVI. I swear they must have been among the most powerful Yorkshire families to have ever lived. In this one, we'll see two churches, one that's active and the other that's redundant. Ironically, it's the redundant one that has more to speak of. It has 4 sculptures within it that were originally supposed to be on display in one of our major cities, but they ended up here instead. We'll also be taking a look at what was one of the UK's biggest ever excavations, where hundreds of bones and artefacts were found dating back to at least Saxon times. The Heslertons are a lot more than 2 small villages on the A64. These are special. Let's go and see why. East and West Heslerton used to be separate parishes, and on these maps they're shown as such. On early maps, East Heslerton was termed Heslerton Parva, whilst West Heslerton was Heslerton Magna. The two joined forces in 1935. East Heslerton lies at an interface between the Vale of Pickering to the north and the Yorkshire Wolds to the south. It's a tiny village, barely even on the map, but there was a larger settlement there at one time. The remains of a DMV can be seen at Manor Farm. From 1918 to 1939, East Heslerton Aerodrome was used by the RAF and civilian pilots. It was located to the east of the village and is today commemorated by a plaque at the East Heslerton Church Rooms. West Heslerton, for almost the last 150-odd years, has been dominated by one family, the Dorneys. The entire village was owned by them until 2016, when the land and property remaining in estate ownership was put up for sale for £20 million, following the death of Eve Dorney in 2010. Eve Dorney was a great-granddaughter of William Henry Dorney, the 7th Viscount Down, and of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur de Vere Capel, Viscount Maiden, and son of the 6th Earl of Essex. With titles like that, you can imagine what sort of village we're in for here. Let's take a closer look at what they had in 1900. East Heslerton had little more than a church, a chapel, and the church rooms. All 3 of those things can still be seen today. Also, this map shows the remains of the DMV more clearly, just to the south of the church. Over in West Heslerton, it was a similar story. Here there was also a church, but there was also a school just to the north of it. That's now moved because overcrowding meant that it needed a bigger site to deal with the influx of children. That old school, though, is still standing. West Heslerton also had a pub, and you can see that marked here, close to the school. The west of the village was dominated by Heslerton Park, the huge grounds that surrounded Heslerton Hall. At this time, the Dorneys were in residence, but they're not anymore. Aside from the alignment of the A64 and some newer houses on the High Street in West Heslerton, not a lot has changed between then and now. These two villages still occupy the same pieces of land as they did before, and a lot of the buildings are the same too. Our route around Heslerton Parish will consist of 2 walks, one short, the other slightly longer. Beginning with East Heslerton, we'll have a little stroll around that village, taking in the church and the old chapel, before we then head west along the A64 to its larger twin. In West Heslerton, we'll start at the site of one of the UK's largest ever excavations, before heading into the village itself, passing the school along the way. The rest of West Heslerton is a squashed circle sort of shape, and so we'll just walk around that. We will have to divert northwards about halfway around in order to get to the playing field, but that's the only difficult part. To finish, we'll then go up to the railway line again to see the station that served both of these 2 lovely Yorkshire villages. Let's go. There aren't many landmarks in East Heslerton, but it does have a pretty lovely church. Before you here is St Andrews, which was designed by George Edmund Street and commissioned by Sir Tatton Sykes. Work started in 1873 and it was completed by 1877. In this one you can find sculptures of the four saintly fathers of the Latin Church: St Augustine, St Ambrose, St Gregory and St Jerome. They were all modelled by James Redfern and they came to East Heslerton thanks to Street. They were originally intended for the north porch of Bristol Cathedral, but they never ended up in the southwest because they were thought too papist by the Dean and were so rejected. Luckily, there was a place they could call home here in North Yorkshire. The sculptures are just one of the reasons to come and see this Grade 1 listed church building. Because this one is now redundant and cared for by the church's Conservation Trust, it's usually open. Let's go in and have a look around. You couldn't write this, could you? You absolutely could not write this. Churches that are managed by the CCT are normally left open. And it's just my luck. Watch this. That the church here in East Heslerton is closed. So we cannot go and see those sculptures. I suppose we can admire some bits on the outside, but that's about all we can do. That's not all we can do, to be fair though, because as well as the church, there's also something to see down here. From the church, it's possible to see the remains of a deserted medieval village to the south. There's a moated site in there somewhere. The land this all occupies belongs to Manor Farm, which takes up most of the eastern side of East Heslerton village. A little further around the circle-like shape that East Heslerton is laid out in, we have the church room, which is effectively a small village hall. Now, on the wall here you can see there's a grey tablet, and that commemorates East Heslerton Airfield. From 1918 to 1939, so in effect the years between the two world wars, East Heslerton Airfield was located to the east of the village. It didn't see a lot of wartime action as you'd expect, but it did have a role to play with local civilian flying. East Heslerton was used by the RAF and civilian clubs like the Scarborough Aero Club, for example. Remnants of its past are still visible on the site, though modern developments like wind farms have since been proposed. This plaque ensures the site shall never be totally forgotten though. The other religious building in East Heslerton is this old chapel built for the Methodists, although I can't say for sure which branch of them would have used it. Whoever did, it's now no longer in use for worship, and it's become this attractive dwelling. It's pretty darn nice. Okay, we're pretty much around East Heslerton now. Now, there's a parish notice board here, and I figured I'm going to give the card to East Heslerton and not West, because it's not featuring much in this episode, so they can have the turn here. So we'll leave that just there. If it'll go, it will. Brilliant. Right, let's go to West Heslerton. Our next job is to get ourselves from east to west. Using the A64, we're about to come to West Heslerton, which is a very different place from the one we've just left. West Heslerton was owned for more than 150 years by one family, the Dorneys. It's only been 16 years since the last member of that family, Eve Dorney, died. On her death, the 150-year-long connection between her family and the village was finally broken, and the estate was put up for sale. Everything that remained within estate ownership was listed for a guide price of £20 million. The lot included the massive Heslerton Hall. It was all eventually purchased by Alban Wise, a Norfolk-based land and property investment company ultimately owned by the Viagnolo Investment Trust. So a few years ago, some guys with shovels and pickaxes and all that other kind of stuff turned up in West Heslerton and decided to do a dig, and the site of that dig was somewhere over here. I'm not exactly sure where it is entirely, but it was somewhere in this kind of region. It's kind of been covered over with farmland now. I think it may well have been in the field beyond this hedgerow here. Let's talk a bit about it and discover what they found. Now, before we go walking around West Heslerton, we have an excavation to talk about. West Heslerton is the site of one of Britain's largest ever archaeological excavations, and experts found a large settlement which seems to have been occupied for several centuries until about 800 AD. It seems the settlement flourished during late Roman and early Anglo-Saxon times, but may have been occupied for a considerable length of time before the arrival of the Romans in Britain. The site covers over 110 acres and contains traces of more than 200 buildings. Also found at Cook's Quarry was a cemetery containing 250 skeletons of people buried between the 4th and 7th centuries AD. Put simply, people have been living in West Heslerton for a very long time. Let's see what life's like here now. We're walking up the high street here, and the next thing to see is West Heslerton C of E Primary School. In 2017, this school celebrated its 50th anniversary on its current site, but it was also its 130th anniversary overall. The original school was at the other end of the high street. What with the expansion of the school during the 1960s, both the old building and the original village hall were used to teach pupils. When the school became far too overcrowded to continue, this new school was built on a piece of land donated by the Dorney estate in 1967. And so this is what's become of the old school. At the other end of the high street we have the village hall, which the old school was converted into. When this was the school, children who attended it made a short trip to the original village hall for their meals. The old village hall was on Old Scarborough Road in a building that residents remember as being built of corrugated metal. That was demolished when the A64 was rerouted, and this would eventually take its place. Now we're at the Church of All Saints. This was built in the 13th century and was formerly dedicated to St Andrew. In 1848 it was described in records as a neat structure, and I think that's a pretty good way to describe it now actually. The chancel was partly rebuilt in 1859. In 1886, Hodgson Fowler heavily restored the building, and most of the structure is now his work, with little other than the chancel surviving from earlier periods. The entire church was given a Grade 2 listing in 1966. Materials-wise, this one's made of sandstone with slate roofs and consists of a nave, a north aisle, a chancel and a vestry. On the west gable is a bellcote, and there's a cross on the east gable. Most of the chancel's windows are original, with only one being a later addition. The east window, rebuilt by Fowler, has 3 stepped lancets and stained glass by Charles E. McKemp. Other stained glass is by Clayton and Bell, and the west window is by Rosemary Rutherford. There's also an original doorway in the north wall, which is now blocked. Internal features of this one include an Easter sepulchre dating from about 1300, an octagonal font probably designed by William Butterfield, a piscina and several memorials. There's no fancy sculptures in this one, but it's still a fabulous little church. It's not a massively photogenic church, that one. There's a lot of trees and shrubs in the way of it, so can't really see a lot of it, to be honest with you. I'm not having a great deal of luck with churches today, I'll be honest. However, we might do better with things like halls and pubs and stuff like that. We continue now around West Heslerton. We'll take a right turn down there. We're heading towards Heslerton Hall, which I know we won't be able to see a lot of, but we will definitely be able to see the pub at the end of this walk. Now we come to the massive Heslerton Hall, the 21-bedroom mansion where the Dorney family lived. Heslerton Hall has seen better days. Since the 1980s, it's been abandoned and in dire need of restoration after Eve Dorney moved out. Eve Dorney inherited the estate in 1964 when the hall truly was its centrepiece. One of the reasons West Heslerton is such a vibrant place full of happiness is because Eve kept rents low for tenants that lived in the estate-owned cottages. Going back further, residents were always welcomed at Heslerton Hall. It was very rarely kept locked and anyone could walk in. Now, I have no idea what sort of condition the hall is in today. The high trees and walls surrounding it don't give much away. Hopefully, it's looking better now. Now we're at the playing field, which is actually on the other side of the A64. It's the only thing within West Heslerton that is. There's a cricket pitch here, quelle surprise, and in the summer, two teams used to take to this field in the Scarborough Beckett Cricket League. I say used to because now things are a little different. When looking at past scorebooks, Heslerton Cricket Club have been a force to be reckoned with since the early 1900s. They have the most wins in the Beckett League since records began in the 1950s. The trouble is that in recent times they found it more and more difficult to get a team together due to the lack of players who now have work and family pressures to contend with, and so the decision was taken to withdraw their Saturday side in 2024. Lastly on the walk, we've got the one and only pub in the two Heslerton villages. This is the Dorney Arms, and by now you should all know where that name comes from. The Dorney Arms escaped the sale of the estate, but was sold separately in 2019. It was sold to experienced pub operators Simon Hatton and Jessica Tarver, who planned to run it as a traditional village pub serving honest home-cooked food. I wonder if they managed that, because I found next to nothing else about this pub. Okay, we're pretty much around the village now. We've just got a couple of steps to do between here and the high street, which you can probably see just behind me there, and we'll make our way back to the car. However, we haven't quite finished with this episode yet. We still need to see the railway station that served both of these villages, and we also need to talk about a guy who used to live here. Here's a piece on him. In 1885, West Heslerton was the birthplace of another famous face, one John Henry Hutton. He was an anthropologist and an administrator in the Indian Civil Service during the period of the British Raj. His work was recognised by the University of Oxford, and he was given various honours. Hutton was the son of a clergyman and attended Chigwell School in Essex before obtaining a third-class degree in modern history from Worcester College, Oxford in 1907. 2 years later, he joined the ICS, spending most of his career in India in Assam. He held positions as a political officer and as a deputy commissioner, and his duties included undertaking lengthy tours within the Assam region to inspect facilities and infrastructure, as well as to settle legal disputes. Between 1929 and 1933, he was census commissioner. Hutton's interest in anthropology was piqued by his appointment in Assam. He published many works on the tribal culture of the area, including the Angami Nagas and the Seema Nagas, which earned him a DSc from the University of Oxford in 1921. Later, during official discussions about the formulation of the Government of India Act in 1935, Hutton worked with some success to protect the interests of tribal minorities, despite opposition from Indian nationalists who suspected it was a scheme intended to divide the country. Hutton resigned from the ICS in 1936 for family reasons, and in 1937 he succeeded T.C. Hodgson as William Wise Professor of Social Anthropology at Cambridge University, where he was also elected a Fellow of St Catherine's College. In writing Caste in India, published in 1946, he was able to draw on his experiences in charge of the census. In other works, he demonstrated an interest in comparative anthropology, writing of possible links between the culture of the Eastern Himalayas and other megalithic cultures in Southeast Asia and Oceania. Hutton died in Wales in 1968 at his home in Radnorshire. He was the last of the distinguished class of civil servants who contributed so greatly to the knowledge of the indigenous peoples of Britain's far-flung empire, who, in a later phase of their career, achieved positions of eminence in academic life. So, one last thing to cover here, and it's the former Heslerton railway station, which served both of the villages we've just seen. It was another on the York to Scarborough line that we've been following all week, and it has the same dates for opening and closure, 1845 and 1930. When this line was built, by the way, it was done so with tourism firmly in mind. George Hudson, its creator, envisaged Scarborough as a major resort. He dubbed it the Brighton of the North. Now, I've been to both Brighton and Scarborough, and I know which one I prefer. A minor road linking West Heslerton and Yeddingham crosses the line just west of the station platforms, with its old goods yard further west of the crossing. Architect George Townsend Andrews designed the station building, which included accommodation for the station master. Bradshaw's Railway Guide of 1850 shows there were 3 passenger services every Monday to Saturday and 1 service each way on a Sunday. This had increased to 4 each way by 1922, but they were withdrawn completely 8 years later. Heslerton did retain its goods facilities for a while afterwards, but they certainly didn't last as long as the ones at Sherburn. That had steel to deal with, as we know, and Heslerton wasn't quite so industrious. The goods yard here closed in 1964. Heslerton had a signal box located west of the crossing, which was brought into service in 1873. Unusually, its gable end was at right angles to the line. It closed in 1993 as part of a programme of signalling and level crossing upgrades. Just like that, we're through Heslerton, and we've got one more to cover this week. Now, do you remember a long time ago in North Lincolnshire, we visited a place called Wintringham? Well, here in Ryedale there's another village with almost the same name. I'll see you there tomorrow. Welcome back to Ryedale again, everybody. It's Friday, it's the weekend tomorrow. Now, we've seen some beautiful villages so far this week, haven't we? Well, this one, to finish the week off, I think is one of the best in Ryedale. It's got a beautiful church. Check this out. That's the Church of St. Peter. And you can find that with its tall spire and awe-inspiring facade in the parish of Wintringham. Wintringham, village at the vineyard. Rounding off the week in Ryedale, we have Wintringham, and that's a place name you may be semi-familiar with from a long time ago. Those of you who followed the North Lincolnshire series will remember Wintringham, and there is a theory that this gets its name in the same way. However, the derivation here is slightly different. Wintringham seems to have been associated with some sort of vineyard, although the growing of grapes around here today is non-existent. Wintringham, instead, is more about its nature reserve now. Land to the west of the village that borders Wintringham Beck was designated as an SSSI in 1975, and it became Wintringham Marsh. It's known for the quality of its plants and the uniformity of their graduation from dry land to marshland. Otherwise, this is a simple linear village that runs along a lane leading from the A64 down towards the likes of the Lutton villages and Helperthorpe, which we've already seen on TVI. The parish includes the hamlet of Place Newton and the deserted village of Linton, which is rather notable. You see, Linton was supposedly the birthplace of Lady Margaret Hoby in 1571, better known as the author of the earliest existing diary written by a woman in English. Although born in Linton, her place of baptism was Wintringham, at the church we'll see on today's walk. Let's go and see it. This is what Wintringham looked like in 1900. This is by no means the smallest parish in the country when it comes to the amount of land it covers. The village may be small, but Wintringham covers two hamlets, one of them being Place Newton, with its extensive country estate. The settlement is mentioned in the Domesday Book as being worth £2 and belonging to Ranulph de Mortimer, who also owned lands in Herefordshire and Shropshire. There is some debate as to where its name comes from. The generally accepted idea is that its name derives from Old English as the homestead of the Wintringers, sharing the same derivation as Wintringham and Winterton in Lincolnshire. However, the University of Nottingham, where I go for all my place name derivations, disagrees. That says that in this case, wintering is a reference to some sort of vineyard, and I like that idea. After all, we know from previous episodes in North Yorkshire that vineyards can and do flourish up here. You only have to look at places like Dunsforth for evidence of that. Two long-distance footpaths pass through this village, the Centenary Way and the Yorkshire Wolds Way. For the first time this week, we're nowhere near the railways. The nearest station was historically at Rillington, almost 4 miles away on the York to Scarborough line. Today, it's Moulton. Let's zoom in and have a look at what Wintringham had at this time. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to define it as a village. There was a church at the southeastern end dedicated to St Peter, and that's the oldest building this one has. Barring the church, which is on a bendy section of the main road through it all here, everything else was laid out along one straight drag. There was a school, a chapel, a reading room and a smithy, and it was all complemented by the course of the Wintringham Beck to the south. Further south was Place Newton with its extensive parkland stretching down towards Linton and the border with Duggleby. That parkland is still very much a feature of this place. It covers 7,000 acres no less, so it's not exactly tiny. This is what Wintringham looks like now. Spot the difference, there isn't much of one. It has grown a little despite what this may suggest. There are more houses along that main road now, and certain buildings like the old chapel have been demolished. Infills have been added here and there. The route for this one is as easy as they come. We will just walk from one end to the other, starting at the church in the east and working our way west to the village hall. That'll capture everything Wintringham has, even the gates of the Place Newton estate. There are two ways we can get back to the start. One is to just turn around and walk back the same way, or you can use a bridleway that runs the length of the village and emerges at the church. I wasn't sure which would be best until I got here, so let's see which one I went for. Let's get going with the church, which sits at the southern end of the village just before the main lane through the place bends southeastwards to link up with the roads that lead to the likes of Westlutton and Helperthorpe. This church is dedicated to St Peter. It was built between the 12th and 15th centuries, and Pevsner described it in his work as the most rewarding church in the East Riding. Of course, it's a North Yorkshire village, now Wintringham, but at the time, it was in the East Riding. This one is no longer used for regular worship. It was declared redundant in 2004 and is now maintained by the church's Conservation Trust. It remains, though, quite the impressive building, and historically important too, as the baptism place for Lady Margaret Hoby. There is no mention of a church in Wintringham in the Domesday Book, but the chancel here is most definitely Norman. It dates from the 12th century, whilst the rest is largely 14th century. The eastern end of the church was rebuilt in the 15th, and windows were added to the nave at the same time. The tower, dating originally from the late 14th century, was repaired in 1818. The roofs were restored in 1887 by Aldred Scott, and oak fittings were added to the chancel by Temple Moore in 1889 and 1891. This one is made of a local calcareous sandstone. Its plan consists of a nave with a north and south aisle, a 3-bay chancel, and the tower with its tall spire reaching high into the Yorkshire heavens. At the eastern end of each aisle is a chapel. On the walls are areas of painting dating from the medieval and post-Reformation periods, but they are otherwise whitewashed. The lectern and double-decker pulpit both date from the 17th century, as do the poppy head carvings on the nave pews. Just up the road from the church you'll come to these gates. Now the road that passes between these leads to the small hamlet of Place Newton, although it's far grander than I've just made that sound. It's a country estate. Here's a bit about it. Place Newton is centred upon a country house which isn't all that far from those ornamental gateways you've just seen, but it's far enough away to not be seen from the road. The house lies at the centre of an estate that stretches to 7,000 acres. The Place Newton estate is well known for game shooting. The estate is predominantly rolling ground, typical of the Yorkshire Wolds, with many interesting features, none more so than the glacial deposits along its southern escarpment. There is road access across the estate which allows teams of guns easy access to all drives and many of the pegs, making shooting very accessible to all. Partridge and pheasant usually are the main game on offer here. Place Newton is all owned by Hugh Cholmondeley. The estate is beautifully kept by the Cholmondeley family and has been for many generations. The family take great pride in the estate and are actively involved in the running of the shoots. Cholmondeley is a powerful name in North Yorkshire. It's certainly not all about the Dorneys around here. As we get closer to Whitby, we'll meet it again because Hugh Cholmondeley and his family are descendants of the Whitby family who left an indelible mark on that town. Place Newton is the key to understanding Wintringham. It grew up as the estate village for Place Newton. As such, improvements to the estate in the 20th century included replacing all the thatched roofs in Wintringham with tiles and the planting of 350 acres of woodland. So let's continue through Wintringham and see what else the Place Newton estate is responsible for. Next up we have the old school, originally built in 1892. This has been converted into a unique detached house now, as schooling in Wintringham ended a long time ago. The property retains its period character with tall fluted brick chimneys, beam ceilings and stripped floorboards. It offers a spacious living area and views across the surrounding farmland. It was last sold in 2021 for £560,000. A Wesleyan chapel was built in the village in 1834, but it was converted into a garage showroom in the 1960s. That showroom went by the name H. Yates & Son, but walking through Wintringham today, you won't find it. That's because at some point after 2009, the old chapel was torn down and replaced with this little house called Jasmine Cottage. At the same time, the two houses next door, back towards the old school, were also built. They stand on what was formerly the garage's yard or forecourt. Wintringham is longer than you might think. We're about, I would say, a third of the way through the village here, and we've already come quite a distance from the church, so walking the whole thing taking quite a while. We're just passing the old smithy here, or the house that sits on the site of the old smithy. We saw that on the map, remember? And just a bit further up, I believe, is the reading room. Might be that house, or it could even have been the one before where that house sits now. Obviously not there anymore if it is that one. We're approaching the War Memorial, which is just up here. Next we come to the War Memorial on the left. Slightly set back from the road, this one takes the form of a simple stone cross with 4 steps at the base. At 12 feet tall, this is one of the largest war memorials I've ever seen. It was unveiled in 1921 by Colonel B.G. Price. There are 6 names on this one, 5 of whom were men who died in World War I and the other a casualty of World War II. Among the 6 there's a member of the Cholmondeley family, George Francis, who one would assume was related somehow to the owners of the Place Newton estate. Towards the western end of the village now, we come to Wintringham Marsh. This is a nature reserve that stretches from the main road along the course of a small stream. That stream is called the Wintringham Beck, and it's a very wooded area. Land to the west of the village that borders Wintringham Beck was designated as an SSSI in 1975. Wintringham Marsh was cited as such because of the quality of its plants and the uniformity of their graduation from dry land to marshland. In the year 2000, a small pond was built between the marsh and the village to celebrate the millennium. This is now a popular dog walking spot for many locals, and for others without canine friends, it's a great place to get out and enjoy the Yorkshire countryside. I have to say, the pond is absolutely fantastic. This has got to be one of the most peaceful spots I've ever been to. Just listen. That's right, you can hear nothing. Absolutely nothing. We've been following the A64 all week and it's been quite noisy in places. Well, out here there is just nothing. It's so peaceful. There's more sheep than humans around. You can see lots of sheep in that field over there. All I can hear right now is this beck flowing that way into Wintringham Marsh. I should make the point that Wintringham Marsh is all this area here. Which we can't get to for obvious reasons, but the pond is like right on the edge of it, and we can definitely get here. It's brilliant. I absolutely love it. As the village begins to come to an end, there's just a small matter of the village hall to consider before the road reaches the A64. Officially titled the Wintringham Community Hall, this is pretty new, having only opened its doors in 2016. However, the hall took some 16 years to build, and so to finally see it open a decade ago was the end of a very long road for the locals. More than 100 people turned out to attend the official opening of this new building. The new hall wouldn't be standing had it not been funded by the National Lottery, other benefactors, and many volunteers who had given their time to help. Councillor Janet Sanderson of North Yorkshire County Council was on hand to cut the ribbon. Okay, so you remember at the beginning of this episode I said There are two ways you can get back to the car here. You can either walk back down the main road, or you can use a bridleway that runs parallel to it and brings you out at the church. Now, I've made the decision to walk back along the main road, and the reason is nothing to do with the bridleway, it's everything to do with time. I don't have a massive amount of time left today, and I still need to go to Linton. That's an interesting settlement. To finish with, we have a piece on Linton and its connection with Lady Margaret Hoby. Essentially, these days, Linton is little more than just a farm named Linton Wold, but around it lie the remains of a deserted medieval village where supposedly Lady Margaret was born. Born Margaret Dakins in 1571, Lady Hoby was an English diarist of the Elizabethan period, and her work is the earliest known diary written by a woman in English. It covers the period between 1599 and 1605 and reflects much religious observance. Margaret was educated by Catherine Hastings, the Countess of Huntingdon, who was a devout Protestant with Puritan leanings. Her home was run as a school for young women. Penelope and Dorothy Devereux, the daughters of Margaret's future father-in-law, also attended that school. As an heiress, Margaret was a valuable commodity on the Elizabethan marriage market. Her first husband was Walter Devereux, a court favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. The two were married at some point between 1588 and 1589. The manor and parsonage of Hackness near Scarborough in the North Riding were purchased for the couple and remained Margaret's property after the death of Devereux at the Siege of Rouen in 1591. 3 months later, Margaret was courted, unsuccessfully, by Sir Thomas Hoby. Margaret instead opted to marry Sir Thomas Sidney, but after he died in 1595, Sir Thomas Hoby finally got her. That's perseverance for you, I guess. They lived at Hackness but had no children. Margaret spent much of her time there in the company of a confessor, Richard Rhodes. During that time, Margaret tended to the sick and infirm in her own community whilst running her household and recording detailed household accounts. The activities reported in her diary reflect profound religious beliefs. The diary gives a notable account of the domestic disciplines of Elizabethan Puritanism. It was written as a pious exercise and as such foreshadowed a school of religious soul-searching in diary form that continued into the 18th century. The diary also shed light on the management of the estate in her husband's frequent absences, but it tells little about the writer's private feelings. As with the diary of Samuel Pepys later in the 17th century, many of the day's entries end with the phrase, "and so to bed." And so ends another run here, but fear not, fans of this district, I will be back in a couple of weeks' time. I have another run coming much closer to its boundary with Hambleton, where we'll be checking out a few tiny villages seemingly in the middle of nowhere. Now that's classic Ryedale. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.